a great honor to be here tonight. And I made a choice tonight. I had originally written a different speech, and then I made a choice to tell you a story tonight that I've never told before. And it's a story that I have kept in my heart now for over 30 years. And tonight just seemed like the right night to share it. It was October 19th, 1983. I was 13 at the time. I was a freshman in high school. It was an ordinary Wednesday in an ordinary week. I woke up at the last possible moment that I could in order to get to school. I woke up, got ready, ran downstairs. My mother was doing the usual hustle and bustle in the kitchen. I grabbed my lunch, I put it in my backpack. I sat down at the dining table to eat breakfast with my dad. My sister was running around really excited because she was about to turn 5 the next day, and my mother was making all these preparations for her upcoming birthday party. As I was sitting at the breakfast table, my father launched into me. "I can't believe you came home that late from the marching band. You really need to give this up. You're spending way too much time playing with your clarinet and not enough time on your studies." Then he went after me about my language choice. "French, that's such a useless language. You should be learning Spanish. That's more useful. More people speak that language." He went on about a bunch of other things, and I just tore into him back, and I said, "Look, you don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I am not giving up band, and I am definitely not learning a language as boring as Spanish. And you're just a horrible dad." Now, in the midst of this, my mom is like running around telling us all to calm down, telling me not to be rude to my father. She's also yelling at my father that, he really ought to go to the doctor that day because he had been experiencing some leg pain. Well, then the clock struck 7:30. We all ran out the door. We all had to go to our respective locations, and my father always dropped us off. Well, that day, my father turned to my mother and he said, "Well, you're going to drive us today." My mom was very nervous. She'd never driven before in her life, and my father had been giving her lessons, but she really didn't want to drive. My father yelled at her and told her she had to drive. She was going to sit in the driver's seat, and that was that. Well, that was the first day my mother actually dropped me off to school. That was the only thing that was different about that morning. Later that day, my father was found collapsed outside a bar in Manhattan. The bartender came out, called the ambulance. When the ambulance came, my father sent the ambulance away because he was feeling better, and he called my mother and told her that he would wait for her to come and then they could go to the hospital together. Then, while he was in the bar, he had another heart attack. And this time when the ambulance came, he was taken away. By the time my mother arrived at the hospital, my father had already suffered his third heart attack in the emergency room and was no more. He was 43 years old. The question that I struggled with throughout most of my youth was this: why did my father die? Was it just fate? My father, named Gunbarjeet Singh Sethi, was the son of Sikh landlords in a little place called Utwal, right outside Rawalpindi in Pakistan. During the partition and the riots, his family, which was relatively wealthy, made their way to Delhi. They made their way to Delhi by night because of all the violence that was taking place, and they made it to Delhi safely. After they made it to Delhi, my grandfather started to prepare a new life and a new business for his family, and suddenly he experienced a heart attack, and he died in his early 40s. When I was a kid, I was always near a gurdwara. That was very important to my father. So I spent a lot of time hanging around lots of Sikhs and lots of social gatherings, and one of the biggest pastimes amongst the women was to do palm reading. So the women would always sort of compete with one another and debate amongst themselves as to who is the best palm reader, who was supposedly better and more accurate. And one time, one lady happened to be reading my father's palm and said, well, you're going to earn millions and lose millions, and you're going to die young if you don't do something about it. I once asked my mom, why do you think Dad died? She said, it was just bad genes. You know, it was nothing he could have done. It was nothing we could have done. It was just fate. So, was my father's life and death predetermined even before he was born? Well, maybe it was just chance. You know, I told you my father was experiencing leg pain on the day he died. This started a few days before. One of the things we learned about him after he died was that he actually did make it to the doctor that day. But due to a scheduling conflict, he wasn't seen by the doctor. They couldn't see him. That undiagnosed leg pain turned out to be a blood clot, which then led to the series of heart attacks. What if he had been seen that day? Would they have found the blood clot? What if he had gone in the ambulance the first time around? What if the ambulance personnel had done some testing on him? What if he had decided to drive as usual as opposed to getting my mother to drive that day? You could take every single minute of that day and run through the various what-ifs. Would any one of those minutes, if they were slightly different, have made a difference? Even now, 30 years later, there are still people that come to the house and pay their respects to my mother, and one of the things that they debate about are the what-ifs. But wait. There is another explanation for my father's untimely death. Wasn't it just bad choices? Oh, when my father walked into a room, he had a tremendous presence to him. He was 5'11", unusually tall for an Indian man. Add to that his turban, he was over 6 feet tall. He was also about 200 pounds. In his early 30s, he was diagnosed with high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol. He was constantly told that he needed to eat better and he needed to exercise, and my mother reminded him of this, and the doctor scolded him about this. But you know what? These very things that he did, which were bad for him, were the very things that we loved him for, too. He was this jolly, very social man. I mean, this was a guy, he had to be around people, and he had to be around food, and he was always inventing new dishes. You know, between the langar and the weddings and the parties at the house, wherever the cook was, my father was right next to him learning the latest recipe for making halwa and fried chicken and pakode. He himself was quite famous for his own fried chicken. My mother never knew who was going to show up at the house for dinner on any given night, and that meant that we always had to have a feast and alcohol ready. He wouldn't have given that up. So let's face it, my father also made some pretty bad choices. Perhaps we all made some pretty bad choices. He could have eaten healthier. We could have thrown out all the bad food, and we could have pressured him to make better choices and maybe go to see a doctor a bit more often. Maybe if he had made just a few small choices, different choices in his everyday life, he might have lived. You know, no matter how I tell the story of my father's death, whether through the lens of fate, chance, or choice, there is an element of truth to that story. No matter how we tell the story of any one of the events that make up our own lives, we could tell those stories in terms of fate, chance, or choice. How did we go from there to here? Any of us could tell that story in terms of fate, chance, and choice, and they would all sound true. But which one is more right or more true? That was my question. You know, as an Indian, I was given the heritage and culture and taught all about fate, the role fate plays in our lives. You know, there are just some things that you can't control. It's controlled by the hand of God or some other unknown force. And that's probably why my father died and why my sister and I went blind. That or maybe random chance. But then there was this American cultural script as well. And that script says, well, you're not supposed to see your life in terms of fate and chance. That sounds awfully defeatist. You're supposed to ask yourself, what do you want, and go after it. Think about your beliefs and make those come true. You're supposed to make the difference. John F. Kennedy once said, one person can make a difference, and every person should try. Well, which script was right? Is it fate? Is it choice? My father's death didn't really answer that question for me. And so then I began to look to his life. Paradoxically, his own life was also made up of this contradiction of fate and chance and choice. You know, on the one hand, my father could never live anywhere that was far away from a gurdwara. Wherever he was, there had to be a gurdwara nearby, and if it wasn't there, he had to help create it, because after all, God had to be nearby, otherwise we were unsafe. On the other hand, he always boasted about the fact that he entered this country with just $1 in his pocket, but he came here with a lot of dreams, and this was a place where you could make anything you wanted happen. So fate and choice go hand in hand. They're together. Was that part of the answer? So he got me interested in choice. He also got me interested in culture. You know, my father loved to travel. He was always traveling all over Europe, the Middle East. He really whetted my appetite for that. And by the way, I did ultimately learn Spanish, and it was actually a useful language. And I ended up traveling quite a bit, and I picked a career and a subject that really allowed me to travel quite a bit. And one of the things that I've loved doing is going around the globe and asking people from different walks of life about the kinds of choices that they make. Consumer choices, investment choices, healthcare choices, career choices. And like him, I'm always interested in knowing what are the different things that people do. And how do they think about life? And what kinds of choices do they make and why? And so in my own research on choice, and I've been studying choice now for, well, I guess probably about 15 years now. In my own research, I suppose you could say that one implicit question that underlies a lot of the research I do is how much control do we really have over our lives? Now, clearly, no matter how many years I study this question, science can never answer this question. But let me give you a few interesting tidbits that have come out of the work that I have done. You know, the people who believe in God are happier. You know, whether you have an arranged marriage or a love marriage, it makes no difference in terms of how likely you are to be happy in your marriage. And even the people who say they know what they want, and then you give them the opportunity to actually judge all the potential candidates on their attributes, they don't actually choose what they say they want. And even if they do, it doesn't actually predict whether they're going to be happy. So choosing doesn't actually give you all the answers. We kind of knew that. How can choice make a difference? Well, let me give you one thought about that. Let's think about our careers. You know, I teach leadership at the Columbia Business School, and the very first day that the students walk into class, in front of them on their desks is an index card. And the very first minute of class, before any introductions are made, I tell them, jot down where do you want to be in the next 1 year, 5 years, and if you are so courageous, in the next 10 years. And out of 75 students, maybe one can do it. Well, I tell them that by the end of the semester, they will all be able to do it, and they will all be able to write down that answer on that index card in less than a minute. I do this not because I actually believe that what they write down is actually what they're going to become. They're rarely correlated. So why do I have them do this exercise? I have them do this exercise because although research shows us that what you say you will be is not correlated with what you will become, it also shows us something else. That the people who are constantly dreaming and planning and coming up with goals, 10 years later, on any measure of success, they're better off. It almost doesn't matter where you got. So what I tell my students is none of us know what our futures will hold for us. We don't know we can't predict our fate. We don't know what chance will throw our way. When it comes down to our choices, how they will unfold is rather uncertain. And so when you come up with a goal for your future, recognize that it can't be fixed. It's not unmalleable. But that's okay. Think of your goals as dynamic, much like your own life, and constantly adapt to it with circumstances, with opportunities. Whatever you choose today is unlikely to change the course of your life. But what you can do with choice is if you make a few careful choices day in, day out, every day, you can transform your life. I told you my father used to love to travel. Well, often on a Friday night when he'd come home, we'd pack up all our things, and Mom would pack up some food, and we would get into the car, and my father always wanted to travel to some new place in the country. He really wanted to see all of this country. And he would just set off. And it was my mother's job to help navigate. And he was always getting lost, and my mother was always trying to and she would be looking at the map and saying, well, I think we need to go back that way. And my father would say, no, we never go back, we only go forward. Whenever people ask me, do you ever regret anything in life? I say I make mistakes all the time, every single day. But you can't undo the past. About the only thing you can hope for is that whatever you do tomorrow is at least not the same mistake as what you made yesterday. You can't control what you remember of your past, but what you can control is what you focus on today. And you can focus on the things that matter to you today. Today, I am 43 years old. And I, too, have a child. And I know that the choices that I make today will affect not just me, but my child. So when I was leaving the house yesterday to come here, I told my son, well, Sunday's your talent show. I expect you to practice your little gig until it's absolutely perfect, and you cannot watch TV until it is perfect. And then I pointed to the juice that was newly made from this brand new juicer we have, one of these high-fiber juicer things. So there was this juice made of kale and pomegranate and cucumber. And I told him he had to drink up a whole glass of it. And my son was like, I can't believe you're making me drink sog. And he told me, you're not going to let me watch TV. You're horrible, Mom. You're ruining my life. I just smiled, rumpled his hair, given that he wasn't going to let me give him a kiss in his state of anger. And I told him I loved him. I have this choice, and I have learned to make this choice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.